The black Rolls-Royce pulled up outside Bella Vista restaurant with the kind of confidence that money brings. Richard Thornfield stepped out, adjusting his expensive suit jacket like he owned the world. At 52, he had made his fortune in real estate, buying up properties and charging whatever he wanted. Money had made him powerful, but it had also made him mean. His 3 friends followed behind him, all dressed in designer clothes and wearing the same look of superiority. They walked into the restaurant like they were doing everyone a favor, just by being there. The hostess smiled nervously and led them to the best table in the house, the one with a perfect view of the beautiful grand piano that sat in the corner. "Good evening, gentlemen," came a soft voice. "My name is Rosa, and I'll be taking care of you tonight." Richard barely looked up from his phone. Rosa Santos had been working at Bella Vista for 6 months now. She was 34, with kind eyes, and a gentle smile that never seemed to fade, even after dealing with difficult customers all day. Her uniform was always perfectly clean, and she treated every customer with the same respect, whether they ordered the cheapest item or the most expensive. "We'll have the wine list," Richard said without looking at her. "And make sure it's the good stuff, not whatever cheap bottles you serve to regular people." Rosa nodded politely. "Of course, sir, I'll bring our premium selection right away." As she walked away to get the wine list, Richard's friend Jack leaned over. "Look at that piano just sitting there. Waste of space if you ask me. This place probably thinks having a piano makes them classy." Richard's eyes lit up with a cruel idea. "Oh, I bet none of these working people can even play a note. They just put it there to look fancy." When Rosa returned with the wine list, Richard was ready with his usual game of making servers uncomfortable. He ordered the most expensive bottle on the menu, then changed his mind twice, making her write down different orders each time. His friends chuckled as Rosa patiently wrote down each change without complaint. "You know what?" Richard said, pointing to the piano. "That instrument over there looks lonely. Do you play?" Rosa shook her head quietly. "No, sir. That's just for decoration." But Richard wasn't done. As Rosa carefully poured the wine, her hand trembled slightly from nervousness. A single drop of the expensive wine missed the glass and landed on the white tablecloth. It was barely noticeable, but Richard saw it and his eyes gleamed with opportunity. "Well, well," he said loudly, making sure other diners could hear. "Looks like we have a little accident here." He held up the stained napkin like evidence in a court case. Rosa's face turned red. "I'm so sorry, sir. Let me get you a fresh napkin and clean this up right away." "Oh, it's fine," Richard said, but his tone suggested it wasn't fine at all. These things happen when people don't know what they're doing. The other customers started looking over. Some pulled out their phones, sensing drama was about to unfold. Richard loved having an audience for his cruel games. "Tell you what," Richard announced, his voice carrying across the restaurant. "I'm feeling generous tonight. I'll give you $500 cash if you can go over to that piano and play something impressive for us." Rosa froze. $500 was more than she made in a week. But she also knew exactly what kind of man Richard was. She had served him before, and he always found ways to make servers feel small. I don't really play piano, sir," she said quietly. "Oh, come on," Richard's friend Mike joined in. "It can't be that hard. Just hit some keys and make some noise. Easy money, right?" The restaurant had grown quiet. Other diners were definitely watching now, some recording with their phones. Rosa felt every eye in the place on her. Her fellow servers watched from across the room, their faces full of concern. They all knew Richard's reputation, and they knew this wasn't really about music. The restaurant manager, Tony, hurried over. He was caught between protecting his employee and keeping a wealthy customer happy. Richard spent thousands of dollars here every month and brought other rich friends with him. "Is everything all right here?" Tony asked, trying to smile. "Everything's perfect," Richard grinned. "I just offered your waitress here a chance to make some easy money. All she has to do is entertain us with a little piano music. Simple, right?" Tony looked at Rosa, then back at Richard. He knew he should stop this, but Richard was too important a customer to upset. "Well, if Rosa wants to." $500, Richard repeated, pulling out his wallet and showing the cash. "Just play one song. How hard can it be?" Rosa looked at the money, then at the piano, then at all the people watching her. Her heart was beating fast. She needed that money desperately. Her mother's medical bills were piling up, and her own student loans weren't going anywhere. But she also knew this was designed to humiliate her. "I suppose I could try," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Richard's smile grew wider. He was already imagining how funny it would be when she sat down and had no idea what to do. His friends were grinning too, ready to enjoy the show. They had no idea that they were about to be very, very surprised. The piano sat there waiting, its black and white keys gleaming under the restaurant lights. Rosa took a deep breath and started walking toward it, her legs feeling shaky with each step. Rosa stood frozen halfway between Richard's table and the grand piano. Every step felt like walking through mud. The whole restaurant was watching now, and she could feel their eyes burning into her back. Some people looked excited to see what would happen. Others looked uncomfortable with Richard's obvious attempt to embarrass her. "What's wrong?" Richard called out loudly. "Having second thoughts? I thought you working folks were supposed to be tough." His friends burst into laughter. Jack raised his wine glass in a mock toast. "Maybe she's too scared. $500 is probably more than she sees in a month." Rosa's hands were shaking. Now, she had dealt with rude customers before, but never with this many people watching. She could see other servers peeking out from the kitchen, their faces full of worry. They all knew what Richard was trying to do. "Come on, Rosa." Richard continued, enjoying every second of her discomfort. "It's just a piano. Even a child can bang on the keys and make some noise. Surely someone your age can figure it out." An older woman at a nearby table looked disgusted. "This is awful," she whispered to her husband. "Why is he being so cruel to that poor girl?" But her husband shushed her. "Don't get involved. That's Richard Thornfield. He owns half the buildings downtown." Rosa heard the whispers around her. Some people were defending her. Others were just excited to see drama unfold. She noticed several phones pointed in her direction, recording everything. Whatever happened next would probably end up on social media within minutes. "Look," Richard said, standing up and walking closer to her. "I'm offering you more money than you probably make in 2 weeks, all for a few minutes of entertainment. What's the problem?" He pulled the $500 bills from his wallet again, fanning them out like a deck of cards. "This could pay for groceries, rent money, whatever you people spend money on." The way he said "you people" made Rosa's stomach turn. She knew exactly what he meant, and it wasn't nice. But the money was real, and she really needed it. Her mother's cancer treatments were expensive, and the insurance only covered so much. Tony, the manager, stepped closer. "Rosa, you don't have to do this if you don't want to. I can handle this situation." But Rosa knew that wasn't true. If she refused now, Richard would probably make a huge scene and maybe even get her fired. Rich customers like him had that kind of power. She had seen it happen to other servers at different restaurants. "No, it's okay," she said quietly. "I'll try." Richard clapped his hands together. "Wonderful. See? She's not as delicate as she looks." More people were gathering around. Now, word had spread quickly through the restaurant that something interesting was happening. The bartender had stopped making drinks to watch. Even the kitchen staff was crowding around the service window. "Just so we're clear," Richard announced to his growing audience, "our waitress here is going to play us a song on the piano. If it's good enough to impress me, she gets $500 cash. If not..." He shrugged and smiled cruelly. Rosa finally reached the piano bench. The beautiful instrument looked enormous up close. It was a Steinway Grand, probably worth more than most people's cars. She had seen pianos like this before, but that felt like a lifetime ago. She sat down slowly and lifted the key cover. The black and white keys stared back at her, perfectly clean and shining. Her hands hovered over them, trembling slightly. "Any day now," Richard called out. "We're all waiting." His friends were recording everything on their phones now, probably planning to share the video in their group chats later. They were already laughing. expecting to see her fumble around and embarrass herself. Rosa closed her eyes for a moment and tried to calm her breathing. The restaurant was so quiet she could hear the ice clinking in people's glasses. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. She thought about her mother lying in the hospital bed, weak from chemotherapy, but still smiling every time Rosa visited. She thought about the stack of unpaid bills on her kitchen table. She thought about all the times in her life when people had underestimated her because of how she looked or what job she had. "This is taking forever," Mike complained loudly. "Maybe she really doesn't know how to play. This is embarrassing to watch." "Give her a minute," Richard said, but his tone made it clear he was enjoying every second of Rosa's discomfort. "She's probably trying to remember which end of the piano makes noise." Rosa opened her eyes and looked down at the keys. Suddenly, something changed in her posture. Her back straightened, and her hands stopped shaking. She adjusted the bench to exactly the right height and tested her foot position on the pedals. Richard noticed the change and frowned slightly. This wasn't the nervous fumbling he had expected to see. Rosa's fingers found their position on the keys. She took one final deep breath and thought about a piece of music that had once meant everything to her. A piece that had taken her years to master and had once made a concert hall full of people cry. She was about to give everyone in Bella Vista restaurant the shock of their lives. What Richard and his friends didn't know was that they were looking at someone whose life had taken a very different path than they imagined. Rosa Santos wasn't just a waitress who happened to work at Bella Vista. She was a woman carrying secrets that would have shocked everyone in that restaurant. 15 years ago, Rosa had been one of the most promising piano students at Juilliard School of Music in New York City. She had graduated at the top of her class with the highest honors possible. Her professors had called her a natural genius, someone who could make the piano sing in ways that brought audiences to tears. Back then, her name had been in music magazines. She had won competitions and performed in famous concert halls. Music. Critics had written that she had magic in her fingers and predicted a brilliant career ahead of her. She had been featured on the cover of Classical Music Weekly as the rising star to watch. But life has a way of changing everything in an instant. During her final year at Juilliard, Rosa's mother had been diagnosed with late-stage cancer. The RIACA treatments were experimental and expensive, not covered by their basic health insurance. Rosa had faced an impossible choice: pursue her music career or save her mother's life. She chose her mother without hesitation. Rosa had sold her concert piano, cashed out her small savings account, and moved back home to care for her mother. She took whatever job she could find to pay the medical bills. First, she worked at a music store, then gave private piano lessons. But those jobs didn't pay nearly enough for the treatments her mother needed. The student loans from Juilliard were crushing her. Even with her music degree, no one wanted to hire a classical pianist who had been out of the performance world for months. The music industry moves fast, and people quickly forget even the most talented players if they disappear. So Rosa had started waiting tables. It was honest work that paid the bills, even if it meant putting her dreams on hold. She told herself it was temporary, just until her mother got better and the medical debt was paid off. That was 5 years ago. Every night after work, Rosa went home to her small apartment and looked at her old sheet music. Sometimes she would sit at the tiny electronic keyboard she had bought at a pawn shop and play quietly so the neighbors wouldn't complain. But it wasn't the same as a real piano. It was like trying to paint a masterpiece with crayons. She never told anyone at work about her background. What was the point? People already looked down on servers enough without thinking she was some failed musician who couldn't make it in the real world. It was easier to just be Rosa the waitress who smiled politely and brought people their food. But now, sitting at this beautiful Steinway grand piano, all those years of training came flooding back. Her body remembered exactly how to sit, how to position her hands, how to use the pedals to create the perfect sound. It was like riding a bicycle. Once you learned, you never really forgot. Rosa could feel the familiar weight of the keys under her fingers. This piano was perfectly tuned and incredibly well maintained. It was the kind of instrument she used to play every day at school, The kind that could produce sounds so beautiful they made people forget about everything else in the world. She looked out at the crowd of people watching her. Richard was still smirking, expecting her to embarrass herself. His friends were holding their phones, ready to capture her failure and share it for laughs. The other diners looked curious but also uncomfortable with the whole situation. Rosa thought about all the times she had performed for much bigger audiences than this. She had played at Lincoln Center, at the Kennedy Center, at venues where presidents and celebrities came to listen. She had received standing ovations from crowds of thousands, but she had never played for stakes this personal before. This wasn't about impressing music critics or winning competitions. This was about showing people that they shouldn't judge others based on their job or appearance. This was about proving that everyone deserves respect, no matter what they do for a living. Rosa selected the piece she would play. She chose something that had special meaning to her, Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor. It was one of the most difficult and beautiful pieces ever written for piano. It told a story without words, moving from gentle sadness to passionate intensity, and back again. She had performed this piece for her senior recital at Juilliard. It had taken her 2 years to master it completely. The piece was so technically challenging that even professional pianists sometimes avoided it. But Rosa knew it by heart, every note and every emotion. As her fingers found their starting position, on the keys, Rosa felt a calm confidence wash over her. This was who she really was. Not just a waitress trying to get by, but an artist with years of training and natural talent that most people could only dream of having. Richard was about to learn a very expensive lesson about judging people by their appearance. The first notes were about to change everything. Rosa's fingers touched the keys, and the first notes of Chopin's ballade floated through the restaurant like morning mist. The sound was so pure and beautiful that conversation stopped mid-sentence. Even the kitchen staff stopped what they were doing to listen. The piece began softly, almost like a whisper. Rosa's left hand played a gentle melody, while her right hand added delicate touches that made the music sound like it was breathing. This was how Chopin had written it. Starting, quiet and mysterious like the beginning of a beautiful but sad story. Richard's smile began to fade. This wasn't what he had expected at all. The music coming from the piano was professional quality, better than what you heard at most concerts. His friend Jack stopped recording and just stared, his mouth slightly open. Rosa's body moved naturally with the music. Her shoulders swayed gently and her fingers danced across the keys with the kind of confidence that only comes from years of serious training. She wasn't just playing notes, she was telling a story through sound. The elderly woman who had defended Rosa earlier grabbed her husband's arm. "My God," she whispered, "she's incredible." As the piece continued, Rosa's playing became more complex. The simple melody from the beginning transformed into something much more challenging. Her hands moved independently, creating multiple musical lines that wove together like threads in an expensive tapestry. The left hand played deep rolling bass notes while the right hand danced through intricate patterns in the higher registers. People throughout the restaurant were putting down their forks and turning their chairs to face the piano. A family with young children stopped their conversation completely. Even the teenagers at the corner table, who had been glued to their phones all evening, looked up and started paying attention. Richard's face was getting red. This was not going according to plan at all. He had expected Rosa to fumble around, hit some wrong notes, and provide entertainment through her embarrassment. Instead, she was giving a performance that would have impressed audiences at Carnegie Hall. "This is impossible," Mike whispered to Richard. "How does a waitress play like this?" But Richard was too stunned to answer. Rosa was now moving into one of the most technically difficult sections of the piece. Her fingers flew across the keys in patterns so fast they were almost a blur, but every note was crystal clear and perfectly placed. The music built in intensity, like a storm gathering strength. The restaurant's acoustics were perfect for piano music. Every note filled the space beautifully, reaching every corner of the dining room. People could feel the music in their chests, the way you feel thunder during a storm. It was powerful and emotional in a way that made some people forget to breathe. Rosa was completely lost in the music now. All the stress and worry from her daily life melted away. She was back in her element, doing what she was born to do. Her face showed the kind of peaceful concentration that comes from doing something you love more than anything else in the world. The piece moved through different emotions like chapters in a book. Sometimes the music was gentle and sad, like someone remembering a lost love. Other times it was passionate and dramatic, like lovers arguing in the rain. Rosa's playing captured every feeling perfectly, making the piano sound almost human. A businessman at a nearby table had tears in his eyes. He had no idea why. He wasn't usually emotional about music, but something about Rosa's playing was reaching a part of his heart he had forgotten existed. The teenage girl in the corner booth grabbed her mother's hand. "Mom, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever heard," she said quietly. Even the servers who worked with Rosa every day were amazed. They knew she was kind and hardworking, but they had no idea she possessed this level of artistic talent. One of them, Carlos, had worked in restaurants for 20 years and had never seen anything like this. Richard was trapped now. He couldn't stop the performance without looking like even more of a fool than he already did. His cruel joke had backfired completely. Instead of humiliating Rosa, he had given her a stage to showcase abilities that most people in the restaurant would never possess. The music continued to build toward its emotional climax. Rosa's whole body was involved now, leaning into the more dramatic passages and pulling back during the quieter moments. Her years of classical training showed in every movement. This wasn't just someone who could play piano. This was someone who understood music at the deepest level possible. As Rosa approached the most challenging section of the piece, the entire restaurant held its breath. What they were hearing wasn't just good, it was exceptional, the kind of performance that people remember for the rest of their lives. And they were all witnessing it because of Richard's attempt to embarrass a woman he thought was beneath him. As Rosa moved deeper into the ballade, something magical happened in the restaurant. People started getting up from their tables and moving closer to the piano. They couldn't help themselves. The music was so beautiful it seemed to pull them forward like a magnet. The family with 3 young children found themselves standing right behind Rosa's bench. The youngest child, maybe 6 years old, watched Rosa's hands with wide eyes full of wonder. "Mommy," she whispered, "how does she make the piano tell stories?" Her mother didn't have an answer. She was too busy wiping away tears that had appeared without warning. The music was reaching something deep inside her that she hadn't felt since she was young and believed in magic. An elderly gentleman who had been eating dinner alone slowly made his way over, using his walking cane for support. When he reached the piano, he closed his eyes and smiled. The music reminded him of his late wife, who had loved classical music and would have been amazed by this performance. Even the restaurant staff couldn't stay away. The bartender abandoned his post completely, leaving drinks half-made as he joined the growing crowd around the piano. The hostess stood at the entrance, not seating new customers because she was too mesmerized by what she was hearing. Rosa's playing had reached the section where Chopin's genius really showed. The music became incredibly complex, with her left hand playing thunderous bass notes while her right hand performed delicate, lightning-fast passages in the treble. It was like watching someone juggle fire while dancing on a tightrope. Impossibly difficult, but absolutely beautiful. A young couple on their first date forgot all about being nervous with each other. They stood hand in hand, both thinking the same thing. This was the most romantic moment either of them had ever experienced. Later, they would tell people that they fell in love listening to Rosa play piano. The music built to what musicians call the storm section, where all the gentle beauty of the beginning transforms into passionate, almost violent emotion. Rosa's entire body was involved now. She leaned into the dramatic passages, her hair falling across her face as she poured everything she had into the performance. Richard's friends were no longer laughing or recording. They looked embarrassed and confused, like they had walked into the wrong movie. Mike put his phone away completely and just stared. Jack kept looking back and forth between Rosa and Richard, trying to understand how this had happened. "Richard," Jack whispered urgently. "Who is this woman? Waitresses don't play like this." But Richard was speechless. His face had gone from red to pale, and he was gripping his wine glass so tightly his knuckles were white. His cruel plan had not just failed, it had exploded in his face in the most public way possible. More people were crying now. A tough-looking construction worker who had stopped by for a quick dinner found himself wiping his eyes with his napkin. A group of college students who had been loud and rowdy all evening stood in complete silence, some of them openly sobbing. The music was telling the story that Chopin had intended, a tale of love, loss, hope, and human struggle that spoke to something universal in the human experience. Rosa wasn't just playing notes. She was channeling emotions that everyone in the room could feel in their own lives. A food critic who happened to be dining at the restaurant that night frantically searched for a pen to write notes. He had come to review the restaurant's new menu. But now he was witnessing something far more significant. This was the kind of performance that people would talk about for years. The teenage girl who had been on her phone earlier was now recording everything, but not to make fun of anyone. She was capturing something beautiful that she wanted to remember forever. "This is going to get millions of views," she whispered to her friend, but not for the reason that rich guy thought. Restaurant workers from the kitchen had gathered, at the service window, some still wearing their aprons and chef's hats. They worked with Rosa every day, but they had never seen this side of her. Carlos, the busboy, shook his head in amazement. "Rosa never said anything about being able to do this," he said quietly. The music was approaching its emotional peak now. Rosa's playing became even more intense, with cascading notes that sounded like waterfalls of pure emotion. Her hands moved, with such speed and precision that it seemed impossible, but every note was perfect and placed exactly where it needed to be. A well-dressed woman near the front started applauding softly during the performance, something that's usually not done during classical music, but the emotion was too much to contain. Soon others joined her in quiet appreciation, not wanting to interrupt but unable to stop themselves from showing their amazement. Richard realized that everyone in the restaurant was now watching him, as much as they were watching Rosa. He could see the judgment in their eyes. They all understood what he had tried to do, and they all saw how completely it had backfired. His reputation in this restaurant, and probably in the whole city, was being destroyed one beautiful note at a time. The music was building toward its stunning conclusion, and Rosa was about to deliver a finale that would leave everyone in the restaurant changed forever. As Rosa moved deeper into the ballade, something magical happened in the restaurant. People started getting up from their tables and moving closer to the piano. They couldn't help themselves. The music was so beautiful it seemed to pull them forward like a magnet. The family with 3 young children found themselves standing right behind Rosa's bench. The youngest child, maybe 6 years old, watched Rosa's hands with wide eyes full of wonder. "Mommy," she whispered, "how does she make the piano tell stories?" Her mother didn't have an answer. She was too busy wiping away tears that had appeared without warning. The music was reaching something deep inside her that she hadn't felt since she was young and believed in magic. An elderly gentleman who had been eating dinner alone slowly made his way over, using his walking cane for support. When he reached the piano, he closed his eyes and smiled. The music reminded him of his late wife, who had loved classical music and would have been amazed by this performance. Even the restaurant staff couldn't stay away. The bartender abandoned his post completely, leaving drinks half-made as he joined the growing crowd around the piano. The hostess stood at the entrance, not seating new customers because she was too mesmerized by what she was hearing. Rosa's playing had reached the section where Chopin's genius really showed. The music became incredibly complex, with her left hand playing thunderous bass notes while her right hand performed delicate, lightning-fast passages in the treble. It was like watching someone juggle fire while dancing on a tightrope. Impossibly difficult but absolutely beautiful. A young couple on their first date forgot all about being nervous with each other. They stood hand in hand, both thinking the same thing. This was the most romantic moment either of them had ever experienced. Later they would tell people that they fell in love listening to Rosa play piano. The music built to what musicians call the storm section, where the gentle beauty of the beginning transforms into passionate, almost violent emotion. Rosa's entire body was involved now. She leaned into the dramatic passages, her hair falling across her face as she poured everything she had into the performance. Richard's friends were no longer laughing or recording. They looked embarrassed and confused, like they had walked into the wrong movie. Mike put his phone away completely and just stared. Jack kept looking back and forth between Rosa and Richard, trying to understand how this had happened. "Richard," Jack whispered urgently. "Who is this woman? Waitresses don't play like this." But Richard was speechless. His face had gone from red to pale, and he was gripping his wine glass so tightly his knuckles were white. His cruel plan had not just failed, it had exploded in his face in the most public way possible. More people were crying now. A tough-looking construction worker who had stopped by for a quick dinner found himself wiping his eyes with his napkin. A group of college students who had been loud and rowdy all evening stood in complete silence, some of them openly sobbing. The music was telling the story that Chopin had intended, a tale of love, loss, hope, and human struggle that spoke to something universal in the human experience. Rosa wasn't just playing notes. She was channeling emotions that everyone in the room could feel in their own lives. A food critic who happened to be dining at the restaurant that night frantically searched for a pen to write notes. He had come to review the restaurant's new menu. But now he was witnessing something far more significant. This was the kind of performance that people would talk about for years. The teenage girl who had been on her phone earlier was now recording everything, but not to make fun of anyone. She was capturing something beautiful that she wanted to remember forever. "This is going to get millions of views," she whispered to her friend, but not for the reason that rich guy thought. Restaurant workers from the kitchen had gathered at the service window, some still wearing their aprons and chef's hats. They worked with Rosa every day, but they had never seen this side of her. Carlos, the busboy, shook his head in amazement. "Rosa never said anything about being able to do this," he said quietly. The music was approaching its emotional peak now. Rosa's playing became even more intense, with cascading notes that sounded like waterfalls of pure emotion. Her hands moved, with such speed and precision that it seemed impossible, but every note was perfect and placed exactly where it needed to be. A well-dressed woman near the front started applauding softly during the performance, something that's usually not done during classical music, but the emotion was too much to contain. Soon others joined her in quiet appreciation, not wanting to interrupt but unable to stop themselves from showing their amazement. Richard realized that everyone in the restaurant was now watching him, as much as they were watching Rosa. He could see the judgment in their eyes. They all understood what he had tried to do, and they all saw how completely it had backfired. His reputation in this restaurant, and probably in the whole city, was being destroyed one beautiful note at a time. The music was building toward its stunning conclusion, and Rosa was about to deliver a finale that would leave everyone in the restaurant changed forever. As the applause finally began to quiet down, people didn't return to their tables. Instead, they crowded around Rosa, asking questions and offering praise. The atmosphere in the restaurant had completely changed. What had started as Richard's cruel entertainment had become a celebration of unexpected talent and human dignity. "That was Chopin's Ballade No. 1, said the elderly gentleman, wiping his eyes with a handkerchief. "I haven't heard it played that beautifully since I saw Vladimir Horowitz perform it in 1982. Young lady, you have an extraordinary gift." Rosa smiled modestly. "Thank you so much. That means everything to me." The businesswoman who had introduced herself as the symphony director pulled out her business card. "Please, I must insist you call me. We're always looking for talented soloists." That performance was absolutely concert quality. More people were gathering around, and Rosa was starting to feel overwhelmed by all the attention. But it was good overwhelmed. The kind that comes from being appreciated for who you really are instead of being judged for what job you happen to have. Meanwhile, at his table, Richard was trying to figure out how to escape this situation. His carefully planned humiliation had turned into a disaster for him instead. People throughout the restaurant were looking at him with disgust, and several had taken pictures of him during Rosa's performance. He knew those photos would not paint him in a flattering light. "We should go," Mike whispered urgently. "This is getting really bad for you." But before Richard could stand up, the food critic approached his table. "Excuse me, are you the gentleman who challenged the young lady to play piano?" Richard nodded reluctantly, not trusting his voice. "I'm David Chen from City Magazine. I have to ask, did you know about her background when you made that challenge?" "What background?" Richard managed to croak out. David looked at him with a mixture of amazement and disgust. "She's clearly a classically trained pianist of the highest caliber. Juilliard-level training, I'd guess. What you just witnessed was a professional quality performance of one of the most difficult pieces in the classical repertoire. Either you knew this and were setting up some kind of publicity stunt, or you just tried to humiliate someone whose musical abilities far exceed anything you could ever dream of achieving." Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish. He had no answer that wouldn't make him look even worse than he already did. Back at the piano, Rosa was being approached by more and more people. A young couple asked if she gave private lessons for their daughter. A man who owned a wedding venue wanted to know if she was available for events. Someone else asked if she had any recordings they could buy. "I'm sorry," Rosa said quietly, "but I don't really perform anymore. I just work here at the restaurant." "But why?" asked the teenage girl who had been recording. "You're incredible. You could be playing in concert halls around the world." Rosa's expression grew sad for a moment. "Life sometimes takes you in directions you don't expect. Music will always be part of me, but right now I have other responsibilities." The construction worker who had been moved to tears stepped forward. He looked embarrassed but determined. "Ma'am, I don't know much about fancy music, but I know that what you just did was special. That man over there," he pointed at Richard, "he was trying to make you look foolish. But you showed him and everyone else that you can't judge people by their job or how much money they have." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. People began looking back at Richard with even more disapproval. Several were now openly talking about his behavior. "I can't believe someone would be that cruel," said the young mother. "Trying to embarrass someone just because they work as a server. It's disgusting." "I know who he is," said another diner. "Richard Thornfield. He owns a bunch of buildings downtown, always acting like he's better than everyone else." Richard could hear every word, and his face was getting redder by the minute. His friends were shifting uncomfortably in their seats, clearly wanting to distance themselves from the situation. Tony, the restaurant manager, finally made his way through the crowd to Rosa. "Rosa, I owe you a huge apology. I should have stopped this nonsense before it started, but I'm so glad it happened, because now I know what an amazing person you are." He turned to address the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, Rosa Santos has been working here for 6 months, and she's been nothing but professional and kind to every customer, even the difficult ones. Tonight you've all seen that she's also incredibly talented. I think she deserves all our respect and admiration." The crowd applauded again, though not as loudly as before. Some people were starting to return to their tables, but many were still lingering around Rosa, hoping to continue talking with her. Richard finally found his voice. "The $500, he said weakly. "I promised her $500. He pulled out his wallet with shaking hands and counted out the bills. But as he tried to approach Rosa, several people stepped in his way. $500, scoffed the elderly gentleman. "After what we just heard, that's insulting. That was worth 10 times that much." Other people began reaching for their wallets. The businessman who had been eating alone pulled out $200. "For the most beautiful music I've heard in years," he said, placing the money on the piano. The young couple added another 100. The family with children contributed what they could. Even the teenagers pooled their money together. Within minutes, there was more than $2,000 piled on top of the piano. Rosa stared at the growing pile of money in shock. "I can't accept all this," she said. "It's too much." "No," said the symphony director firmly. "It's not nearly enough. What you just gave us was priceless." Richard stood there holding his $500, looking smaller and more pathetic by the minute. His grand gesture had been overshadowed by the genuine appreciation of people who truly understood what they had witnessed. The tables had completely turned. Rosa was surrounded by admirers and opportunities, while Richard was left alone with his cruelty exposed for everyone to see. And the night was far from over. The next morning, Rosa woke up to her phone buzzing constantly with notifications. The teenage girl had been right. The video had gone viral overnight. But it wasn't just one video. Multiple people had recorded Rosa's performance from different angles, and they were all spreading across social media like wildfire. The video with the most views was titled, "Arrogant Rich Man Tries to Humiliate Waitress, Gets the Shock of His Life." It had already been shared hundreds of thousands of times, with comments pouring in from around the world. People were calling Rosa's performance breathtaking, life-changing, and proof that you should never judge anyone. Rosa sat in her small apartment scrolling through message after message from strangers who had been moved by her story. Many shared their own experiences of being underestimated or mistreated because of their jobs. Others were musicians who offered support and opportunities. Her phone rang. It was Tony from the restaurant. "Rosa, you need to see the news," he said excitedly. "Channel 7 wants to interview you this morning. The newspaper called asking for a story. And we've got people calling all day asking when you'll play again. I've never seen anything like this." By afternoon, Rosa found herself sitting across from a local news reporter, still wearing her simple clothes and trying to process how quickly her life was changing. "Rosa, millions of people have now seen your performance," the reporter said. "Can you tell us about your musical background?" Rosa took a deep breath and told her story publicly for the first time. She talked about Juilliard, about her mother's illness, about the difficult choice between music and family. She spoke about working as a waitress not because she had failed at music, but because sometimes life requires sacrifice for the people you love. "I want people to understand," Rosa said quietly, "that everyone has a story. Everyone has dreams and talents and struggles that you can't see from the outside. The person serving your coffee might be a poet. Your taxi driver might be an engineer from another country. We should treat each other with kindness because we never really know who we're talking to." The interview aired that evening and was shared even more widely than the original video. Rosa's message about dignity, respect, and hidden talents resonated with people everywhere. Within a week, Rosa's life had completely transformed. The symphony director made good on her promise and offered Rosa a position as a guest soloist. A recording company reached out about making an album. Music schools invited her to give masterclasses to their students. But the most meaningful offer came from an unexpected source. A wealthy philanthropist who had seen the viral video contacted Rosa about starting a scholarship fund for talented musicians whose families couldn't afford their education. She wanted Rosa to help identify and mentor young artists who might otherwise never get the chance to develop their gifts. Rosa accepted this opportunity eagerly. She understood better than anyone how financial circumstances could derail musical dreams, and she wanted to make sure other young musicians didn't have to choose between their art and their family's well-being. Meanwhile, Richard Thornfield was experiencing the other side of viral fame. Videos of his cruel behavior had been viewed millions of times, and the comments were not kind. His real estate business began losing clients who didn't want to be associated with someone known for humiliating working people. Several business partners quietly ended their relationships with him. Richard tried to issue a public apology, but it felt hollow and self-serving. He had been exposed as someone who enjoyed making others feel small, and no amount of carefully written statements could change that impression. 3 months later, Rosa stood on the stage at the city's main concert hall, wearing a beautiful black gown and preparing to perform with the symphony orchestra. The hall was sold out, with many of the same people who had witnessed her performance at Bella Vista sitting in the audience. Before she began playing, Rosa spoke to the crowd. "6 months ago, I was just a waitress trying to pay my bills and take care of my family. I want to thank everyone who saw past my uniform and recognized my humanity that night at Bella Vista restaurant. But more importantly, I want to challenge all of you to look for the hidden talents and dreams in everyone you meet. The person who cleans your office building might be a brilliant writer. Your child's teacher might be a gifted artist. We all have gifts to share with the world if we're given the chance and treated with respect. She sat down at the beautiful concert grand piano and began to play the same Chopin ballade that had changed her life. But this time, she wasn't playing to escape humiliation or prove a point. She was playing to share beauty with the world, which is what music was always meant to do. In the audience, many familiar faces watched with tears in their eyes. The elderly gentleman who had defended her was there with his children and grandchildren. The young couple who had fallen in love during her first performance were now engaged and planning their wedding. The teenage girl who had recorded everything was there with her parents, having been inspired by Rosa's story to start taking piano lessons herself. Even some of Rosa's former co-workers from Bella Vista were in the audience, beaming with pride as they watched their friend achieve her dreams. As the final notes of the ballade filled the concert hall, Rosa thought about how one cruel moment had ultimately led to this beautiful one. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us can become the doorways to our greatest opportunities. The standing ovation that followed lasted for 10 minutes, but this time, Rosa wasn't surprised by the applause. She had learned that when you share your authentic self with the world, people respond with love and appreciation. After the concert, Rosa returned to her dressing room to find a surprise visitor. It was her mother, who had been declared cancer-free just 2 weeks earlier. "I'm so proud of you, mija," her mother said, tears streaming down her face. "Not just for the music, but for never losing your kindness, even when people were cruel to you." Rosa hugged her mother tightly. All the sacrifice had been worth it. Her music career was back, her mother was healthy, and she had learned that sometimes our greatest setbacks can become our most beautiful comebacks. Richard Thornfield's attempt to humiliate a waitress had instead revealed a brilliant artist to the world. Rosa's story became a reminder that everyone deserves respect, that talent can be found in unexpected places, and that kindness will always triumph over cruelty in the end. The piano that had once been just decoration in a restaurant had become the instrument of transformation, not just for Rosa, but for everyone who witnessed the power of treating others with dignity and recognizing the extraordinary potential that lives within ordinary people.